Good afternoon, Honored Minister, dear people. We have some work to do this afternoon and from now onwards. You are all warmly welcome both here in Oodi Library, Helsinki, Finland, and online. My name is Johanna Korhonen. I act as a moderator of this afternoon seminar organized by the Nordic Council of Ministers, Ministry of Justice and Ministry of Social Affairs and Health of Finland. We take corona safety seriously here, but as we are only few here in Oodi Library, we think it is safe for the speakers also to speak without wearing masks. Living as an LGBT person is not even now a normal and ordinary way of living without any pressure related to LGBTI characteristics. Many of us are still not able to live their lives on equal terms with others. Globally, of course, our Nordic countries are certainly one of the best places to live as an LGBT person, but even here, these people have a risk higher than average of being violated, being harassed, or being targeted by hate speech. And the question is not only about hate crime, but also about hate incidents or hate acts, minor than crime, but still hurting and harmful. Personally, with personal experience of discrimination in working life, I would say that our laws here in Finland, they are up to date, but the problems exist on practical level, like in attitudes, atmosphere, and what happens in real life. There is a loud and strengthening threat which comes from certain religious groups who defend their freedom of religion by suppressing minority groups linked to gender and sexual orientation. This afternoon, we will focus on what can be done to diminish these negative and harmful phenomena. The Nordic countries are working together. I'm very happy because of that, together to develop long-term policies to improve the situation. We have a new report initiated by the Nordic Council of Ministers. The name of the report is Hate Crimes Targeting LGBTI People in the Nordic Countries. We'll talk about that report more during this afternoon. So let us begin. May I welcome our Minister for Nordic Cooperation and Equality, Thomas Blomqvist. Varsågod.
Tack, kiitos. Thank you. Dear participants, welcome to the seminar on LGBTI people's safety and well-being and good practices in the Nordic region. LGBTI rights have been part of the Nordic cooperation on gender equality since 2020. This was an important step forward in our cooperation. The Nordic countries are among the most progressive in the world when it comes to LGBTI rights. Together, we can be even more effective in improving the lives of LGBTI people. The strategy of the Nordic Council of Ministers on LGBTI rights names 3 goals for the cooperation. One of these goals is to promote greater freedom and openness for LGBTI people. This also includes combating violence and hate crimes. Unfortunately, also in the Nordic countries, LGBTI people face an increased risk of becoming victims of violence and hate crimes. Too often, these crimes are not reported to authorities. Work has already been done across Nordic countries to respond to these problems. It is important to share information on this work and to learn from each other's experiences. The Nordic cooperation offers a great platform for this. The Finnish presidency in the Nordic Council of Ministers commissioned to prepare a Nordic mapping of structures and policies on combating hate crime and violence. The mapping has now been published. It outlines efforts in different Nordic countries in the fight against hate crimes. I believe it will help to share knowledge and support the future work in this field. In this seminar today, experts from across Nordic countries will be able to share good practices and to discuss how we can continue to improve the safety of LGBTI people. The mapping and this seminar are great examples of how Nordic cooperation can help to strengthen work on LGBTI equality. Today, when discussing hate crimes and harassment against LGBTI people, we must not forget the worrying development of the so-called anti-gender movement. In recent years, we have seen growing resistance towards gender equality and LGBTI rights, as well in the Nordics as at the global level. It is not only a threat to the safety and welfare of individual LGBTI people, but it is also a threat to all activists and NGOs working for LGBTI rights. The Nordic Council of Ministers has decided to prepare a Nordic roadmap to address the issue in a strategic manner. I'm pleased that in the framework of the Nordic cooperation, we are able to support Nordic cooperation of both public authorities and civil society in this matter. And finally, I want to wish you fruitful discussions today and hope that you will be able to build new Nordic connections in this field of work. Thank you. Kiitos. Tack.
Thank you, Minister Blomqvist, for bringing up these important topics. We will carry on with them during this afternoon. Our first speaker attends online. He's David Brax. He works as a senior advisor for Swedish Secretary for Gender Research. And David has promised to tell us about law and policy responses against hate crime in the Nordic region. And if you have any comments or questions to David or to anyone here, I remind you of the possibility of sending chat messages. So you see the chat address in the event site. So please use it. We will then get answers to our questions and comments afterwards. David should be there. Okay, hello David, you're welcome.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you. I would like to start with saying thank you for inviting me. My name is David Brax and I am a senior advisor at the Swedish Secretariat for Gender Research. And I was one of the persons behind the report that you see here on the slide. So the purpose of this report, Hate Crimes Targeting People in the Nordic Countries, was to contribute to sharing of knowledge between the Nordic countries when it comes to hate crime. The report was commissioned to NIC. NIC stands for Nordic Information on Gender, and it's located at the Secretariat at the University of Gothenburg. The role of NIC in the Nordic cooperation is to produce, compile, and communicate research policy and other forms of relevant information in the gender equality and LGBT area in the Nordic countries. Short about me then, as I said, I'm a senior advisor, but I have a background in hate crime research, and that's why I've been involved in this project. This event, as you will see if you read the report, is a very timely one in light of recent developments regarding both legislation and policy in this area. So I'm glad to be addressing you at this point in time. So thanks again for letting me. The presentation, which is a rather short one, will be divided into two general parts. First, I will have to address the general issue about hate crime, and then I will take up some themes from the report. I will end by mentioning some challenges to the works and point out some ways to move forward. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so when I talk about hate crime, I usually start with mentioning two basic questions. The first is a conceptual question, namely, what is a hate crime? What should count as a hate crime? And the other is a normative question. Why should we be concerned with it? Why does it call for particular legal and policy measures? In the most general sense, hate crimes are acts that are motivated by group hostility. Typically, although this remains a contentious issue, typically it's acts motivated by group hostility towards groups that are recognized minorities. Now, in the Nordic region, there's quite a lot of similarity between the legal frameworks dealing with this. I will get back to this later on. Hate crimes are of particular concern because of the societal impact that these crimes have. Typically, hate crime laws are justified in the same way that any law in criminal law is justified, namely first by the harm that is caused or risked by these acts, and secondly, by the blameworthiness of the actor that commits the crime and commits the acts. Usually when we motivate hate crime laws, we have tended to focus on the first part here. And it's justified by the claim that is mostly associated with a British criminologist called Paul Ligansky, namely the claim that hate crimes hurt more. Hate crimes hurt more than other crimes, that is, crimes that lack this hate aspect. It does so in three distinct ways. First, by the primary harm, the harm that befalls the victim, the individual victim of the crime. Then we have the secondary harm. The secondary harm, the fact that hate crimes hurts the victim's group. The group itself is reminded of the risks that they are facing in society, and it has an impact on the standing it has in society. And lastly, hate crimes harms society more generally, society as a whole. For instance, by worsening relations between groups and by undermining trust between groups in society. And besides, it has an adverse impact on equality generally. Now, in recent years, it has been more and more recognized that hate and threat in the public domain is a problem for democracy. It's not only a problem because of the limiting of particular individuals by being silenced by hate and threat, but it's also a problem because it has discriminatory effects. It's particularly people belonging to minorities, and particularly and women for that matter, are facing a larger risk of being targeted. And that means that certain people, certain groups of people, and certain perspectives are more likely to be silenced. So that's the context in which hate crime have started being perceived in late years. Before I move on to the themes from the report, I want to mention the role that hate crime and hate crime legislation and policy plays in addressing discrimination more generally. Hate crime plays an important symbolic role. It's not just about punishing offenders to the extent that they deserve or offering support to individual victims. It's more about using the strongest means available to the state to condemn intolerance and discriminatory treatment more generally. Hate crime has a particular role to play in measures against discrimination more broadly because of the moral clarity of these cases, of hate crime cases, as compared to other forms of discrimination. Hate crimes are obvious wrongs, and their attitudes, the hostility behind them that drives them are anathema to the equal human rights to which states are committed. However, it's important to keep in mind two things. First of all, the attitudes that hate crime legislation is set against are widespread in the social reality that targeted groups face. That is, while a clear message is sent by the legislation, a message of protecting these groups and a message of equality, there is also the opposite message in society, prevalent in society, and that is indeed why we need this form of legislation and this form of policy to begin with. The second thing we need to keep in mind is, particularly for LGBTI persons, up until quite recently, the state itself was one of the perpetrators of discriminatory practices and oppression. To some extent, that may still be true. There is also a great deal of worry in targeted communities that things may change for the worse politically. Even if we currently have a great deal of support for LGBT people in politics, this may change for the worse. And both these facts has an impact to the support that members of these communities expect from state actors, and thus on whether they are likely to report being victimized. Okay, next slide. We'll move on to the part about the themes from the report. We have two main parts of the report. The first concerns legislation. The history of how hate crime legislation come to be in the Nordic countries varies a bit and in interesting ways. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into that today, but the legal constructions are similar. The term hate crime is used as an umbrella term in the Nordic countries. It covers hate-motivated crimes. It covers hate speech or different forms of ethnical agitation. It usually covers unlawful discrimination. As I said, there are quite similar legal constructions in the Nordic countries. The most important regarding which they differ are what characteristics are protected or are explicitly protected under these laws. The development of what groups are being protected under these laws follows an international pattern. First, it covers race, nationality, and skin colors. After that, religion and belief system have been added. In more recent decades, sexual orientation have been included, and in later years, gender identity has started being covered by these laws. In some of the Nordic countries, we have disability covered, but not all at the moment. Now, what groups are covered or being mentioned in the legislation tracks the reasons why we have legislation and policy to begin with. However, it's important to realize that the development have been gradual. We have included groups under these laws, usually one at a time, one characteristic at a time. One important theme from the report is that protected characteristics has been expanded in recognition of it being an advantage for a targeted group to be explicitly mentioned in legislation. If you have a formulation that says any similar group, if you have a list of groups that can be targeted and then say groups that are similar to this may also be targeted by hate crimes, that is not as good in a protection as if you are included. And that is the argument that are being pushed forward when we include more and more groups under these legislation. In the Nordic countries, there are currently a few developments that are of interest. There's a Danish bill under consideration, which includes a proposal to include intersex people through the term sex characteristics. We have the Icelandic bill, which has a similar suggestion, and we have the Finnish bill, which I wish I knew if it had been decided yet or not, which would be the first case of gender being included as a protected characteristic in the Nordic countries. Okay, let's move on to next slide on policy and implementation. Let me begin with a quite general remark. There is generally a heightened sense of awareness, increased awareness in recent years, both of the impact of hate crime on targeted communities and society as a whole, but also about the challenges to dealing with hate crime in a good way. Because it's not enough just to have legislation, it has also to be implemented in a good way. And there is increased awareness about this fact in recent years. That's one of the things we have found in this report. It's also a theme from the report that measures to counter hate crime is regularly seen as a key part of tackling discrimination more broadly. We have found that most Nordic countries have some form of ongoing policy initiative to counter hate targeting LGBT people. And an important part of this is increased cooperation and recognition of the importance of increased cooperation between government agencies and civil society organizations. Civil society organizations are doing a lot of work in this area, and there's increased recognition of this fact in policy efforts. We see also a number of initiatives to improve victim support services. Civil society organizations are important here also to work as a go-between between police officers and victims. And this role is being increasingly institutionalized. Further thing, and I don't think I have the slide here, is that in the several Nordic countries, special resources are being given to police officers, and specific instruction to police officers and prosecutors specializing in these issues. A number of initiatives are being underway on building trust and eliminating hurdles for hate crime reporting, making sure that targeted individuals are not afraid of reporting hate crimes. And finally, we have a number of initiatives about enhancing knowledge about hate crimes and making sure that that knowledge is being shared within and between organizations. Okay, next slide, please. Now, the policies are usually presented along with a list of challenges to work, and that's a very important worthy fact. It's important to recognize that it's not just what's being done, but realizing that more things need to be done and keep on being done. One of the challenges to hate crime policy and hate crime legislation in general is to make sure that the hate crime aspect, the hate aspect of these crimes, is not lost in the criminal justice process, because that often happens. The information that a crime is a hate crime one needs to travel the entire way from the incident to the prosecution and ideally to the verdict. And there are a lot of stages on the way where that aspect can be lost if the actors are not given specific instructions on how to deal with these cases. Even if it's clear that a lot of cooperation is being done between agencies and authorities dealing with hate crime, more of this is clearly needed. That is a recurring theme in the report. It's also a recurring theme that more cooperation between civil society and police in victim support activities is needed. Part of this and part of the first item of this list is that we need to overcome different hurdles for reporting, which we do in part by building trust in targeted communities. Even if a lot of knowledge sharing is going on, there is always need for more knowledge, both to be built and to be shared. Both the knowledge and competency to deal with hate crimes must be widely distributed in organizations. That is why, but it's clear that it's good to have specialized police officers and prosecutors. It's important that it doesn't stop there, that the information, the competency that those people have is shared widely in those organizations, because it's not always the specialists that come across the cases. And the last challenge that I will mention here is that there is a clear need for evaluation of measures, evaluation of what we do in order to improve treatment of hate crime cases. We need to ask ourselves continually if the criminal law process is well served to deal with the issues facing targeted communities. Okay, next slide. Okay, some concluding remarks then about how to move forward. The general observation you can make is that the report is promising. It's clear that governments in the Nordic countries take this issue seriously and conceive of this work to deal better with hate crime is a key part in countering discrimination broadly in the Nordic countries. It's also clear that the Nordic region has much to gain by increasing cooperation in these matters. We have similar demographics, we have similar cases that we have to deal with. We have similar challenges to making sure this work functions. And there is therefore a great deal of potential in increased cooperation between the Nordic countries. So therefore, hate crime targeting LGBT people should be an ongoing concern for the Nordic Council of Ministers. It's clear that there's a lot to be gained from that. It's also clear that the knowledge that we develop should be shared not only between authorities in one country, but also between countries. And that's one of the reasons why this event is such a good one to start with. It's clear that we must keep listening to NGOs, and I think it's most of people working with this recognize this fact, but it's worth reminding of, even especially in the face of changing political landscape. We need to, more than we're doing recently, is to evaluate measures to counter hate crime and improve on the support to victims and targeted communities. We must draw lessons from the cooperative coordination efforts and actions plans in each country, and we can draw those lessons and share the experiences between the countries. It's important to solve differences and find a common understanding of what a hate crime is and how it works. This is key to not losing cases, and it's key to combating hate crime. I think a part of this is to encourage Nordic research collaboration. This, of course, is one of my favorite items on this list. We have a lot of researchers in the Nordic countries working on hate crime, but we don't have a lot in each country. It's clear that as a whole, the Nordic region is a good research environment to do hate crime studies in, but we need more collaborations for this to work better. And the final point that I want to make is that we must keep reminding ourselves why hate crime legislation and hate crime policy is needed. And one way to do this is to keep treating hate crimes and the threat that hate crimes is not just a threat to target communities, but to society as a whole. I can take the next slide. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much for presenting us the report, which I personally thought is an impressive one. And I liked particularly much those concrete and very practical ideas. There are plenty of in the report. So questions and comments, my dear people, I'm waiting for them here to this telephone. Okay, maybe you will have some questions later on. Meanwhile, you might be eager to tweet. I guess you have very many ideas what tweets in your heads. And so the hashtags there are two of them, hashtag Norden 2021, so this year, Norden 2021. And the other one is hashtag LGBTI Norden. So please send your ideas via tweets. Thank you very much, David. And so our next speaker, we are going on. Our next speaker is also attending online. He is Ole Ritter, police officer from Danish National Police, Denmark. Question on what can be done, and we'll hear examples on actions and practices from different Nordic countries. And the first one of these countries is Denmark with Ole. Okay, Ole, we are ready for you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and hello everyone. My name is Ole Ritter. I'm representing the Danish National Police and working in our Crime Prevention Center. I'm pleased to be here and to get the chance to tell you about a campaign called Stop the Hate that we did back in 2019. But first of all, just a very short introduction to what constitutes a hate crime in Denmark. So when we're talking about a hate crime, it's defined as a criminal offense based on the victim's race, color, national origin, religion, or sexual orientation or gender identity. And from May this year, disability has also been added to the legislation as a bias motive. We have monitored this area very closely since 2015, and on the basis of this, we make an annual report that, among other things, describes the development of hate crimes offenses reported to the police. The background for this campaign was that we saw a stagnant number of reported incidents, around 450 cases in 2017 and 2018. and compare with the victim survey report that suggested around 30,000 incidents, we found that we had to try to raise awareness of this underreported type of crime. And a small note to the 30,000 incident is it's from a victim survey report, and what people say they have experienced may not be illegal in terms of legislation, but nevertheless, the dark number is substantial, no doubt about that. And before telling you and showing you what the campaign was, I want to emphasize that this campaign not only targeted the LGBTI environment, but all the minority groups represented in the legislation. The campaign consisted of an information video, some postcards, a Facebook Live event, and last but not least, we were visiting some stakeholders. Furthermore, we did some internal initiative, but I'm not going to tell you a whole lot about that. That was educating police officers and some general internal awareness. So I think we should start to take a look at the video that we did. And it lasts just under 4 minutes, so let's see.
En hadforbrydelse, det er et strafbart forhold, som har baggrund i offerets tro, etnicitet, hudfarve, seksualitet eller kønsidentitet. Og i virkeligheden kan det være alt fra tilråb på gaden til motiver, der gemmer sig i vold eller hærværk. Og det er det, der kan gøre, at hadforbrydelserne kan være en lille smule sværere at identificere, når man kigger ud over alle anmeldelser af strafbare forhold. En hadforbrydelse bliver efterforsket på lige fod med alle andre forbrydelser, og det vil sige, at i første omgang indleder vi en efterforskning med henblik på at kunne sigte en gerningsperson, og så kører hele det strafferetlige system på lige fod med alle andre strafbare forhold. Så moniterer vi samtidig området tæt, og det gør vi med henblik på at kunne danne os et overblik over området, og at kunne lave nogle analyser, som hjælper os til at kunne målrette vores indsatser bedre. Hvis vi er i stand til at identificere, at et særligt område er under stor belastning i bestemte tidspunkter, eller at der sker mange hadforbrydelser på bestemte tidspunkter i bestemte områder, så giver det os jo muligheden for at kunne sætte effektivt ind. Det er vigtigt at sætte effektivt ind over for hadforbrydelser, fordi vi lever i et retssamfund. Vi lever i et demokrati, hvor folk skal kunne føle sig trygge og bekvemme, som de er. Årsrapporten, som vi har udgivet nu her, viser flere ting. På den ene side kan man sige, at vi ikke har en meget stor udvikling i antallet af de anmeldte hadforbrydelser i politiet. Og det kan skyldes, at vi er blevet bedre til at identificere de hadforbrydelser, der er, så vi er ved at have et mere retvisende billede af de anmeldelser, der bliver givet til os. Men det er også et udtryk for, at vi arbejder med meget små tal. Og de tal, vi ser, ikke nødvendigvis stemmer helt overens med den fornemmelse, vi har af, hvor mange hadforbrydelser, der rent faktisk finder sted. Og derfor er udgivelsen af hadforbrydelsesrapporten også en anledning til at få sagt, at vi rigtig gerne vil have øget anmeldelsestilbøjeligheden, så hvis man føler sig udsat for en hadforbrydelse, så skal man rette henvendelse til politiet. Der kan være mange grunde til, at forurettede ikke anmelder en hadforbrydelse. Man kan være i tvivl, om man overhovedet har været udsat for en hadforbrydelse, men der ligger jo også nogle faktorer i det, som kan være grænseoverskridende og skulle fortælle til andre mennesker. Og det er bare vigtigt for os i politiet at få sagt, at vi vil rigtig gerne have anmeldelserne. Vi vil rigtig gerne kunne sætte effektivt ind. Og for at kunne det, så er vi nødt til at have et billede af området, og gerne så godt et kendskab til området som overhovedet muligt. Vi har ikke et klart billede af en profil på en gerningsperson. Det kan være alle aldersgrupper, det kan være alle typer. Men det er jo en af grundene til, at vi også gerne vil have et bedre anmeldelsesgrundlag. For vi vil meget gerne blive skarpere på, hvem er det, der begår hadforbrydelserne, og hvem er det, de bliver begået imod, og i hvilke situationer er det, det sker. Jamen, i virkeligheden kan alle blive udsat for hadforbrydelser. For en hadforbrydelse behøver ikke nødvendigvis at hænge sammen med offeret, men kan hænge sammen med gerningspersonens oplevelse af, hvad offeret er for en. Og det vil sige, at i virkeligheden kunne jeg blive udsat for en hadforbrydelse, fordi at gerningspersonen tror, at jeg har en speciel seksuel orientering. Vi ser også, at der er hadefulde ytringer på internettet, og det er også noget af det, vi gerne vil have et bedre billede af. Og det er vigtigt for os, fordi at uanset hvilken baggrund man har, så skal man kunne føle sig tryg og sikker i de rum, man færdes i. Uanset om man er hjemme, i de offentlige rum eller i sociale sammenhænge.
So this video was uploaded to our SoMe platforms and as well distributed to our key stakeholders. And that's the Muslim community, the Jewish Society, and LGBTI Denmark. And they all asked for some information material they could share in the organizations, and we agreed that a video made by the police would be more powerful than some written material. Besides the video, we made some postcards, as you can see here, and we made it in cooperation with an advertising company. And again, in cooperation with the key stakeholders, we agreed on the text on the back of the postcard and that it should be written in 3 different languages. And as you see here, it was in Danish, Arabic, and English. The postcard were distributed to bars and restaurants through the advertising company, and we ourselves distributed them to our key stakeholders and to police stations around the country where they were accessible in the reception area of the police station. Some 40,000 postcards were printed and 93% of the postcards were taken. Next slide, please. Furthermore, we did a Facebook Live event. The police have 300,000 plus followers, and the Facebook Live event lasted around half an hour, and we were available for questions, and we informed the audience about hate crimes in general. And we also made visits to our key stakeholders, as you can see here, and we have a close cooperation with our key stakeholders, and we hold 2 dialogue meetings with them each annually. And during the campaign period, we visited a mosque and a synagogue, and we went to the Pride of Copenhagen, where we did some presentations and where the audience could ask us questions afterwards. Yeah, so to wrap things up, I think it's fair to say that with very limited resources, we succeeded in raising awareness in this area. The key stakeholders were glad to have some concrete, useful information, and the dialogue with the key stakeholders afterwards tend to be better and more informal, as we got to know each other a little bit better during the campaign period. And the number of recorded incidents rose the following year. If it was due to the campaign, we of course don't know for sure, but we believe that it's not a coincidence. And next slide, please. Yeah, and that was a very short version of our campaign. Feel free to ask any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ole. Your message was very clear in the video and in the presentation, that you must always report a crime. It is not a question of interpretation or an opinion or being too oversensitive or something. Crime is crime, and you have to report it to the police. So thank you very much, Ole. We'll be going on with the discussion. We'll be back to that. We now go on with 2 more presentations. First one, which is Mila Aaltonen. She represents the Ministry of Justice of Finland, and she's been working as a project manager for a project which is called Facts Against Hate. Mila, ole hyvä.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to present the results of our project today. It's actually a perfect day for that because it's the last day of our project today. So in recent years, the Ministry of Justice has used EU funding to support work against hate crime. This work complements the work that other authorities and also other actors are doing on the field. We started in 2017 with a project called Against Hate That project had a mapping of different activities we were doing at the time, and also had training for police officers and prosecutors and judges. It also developed data gathering. And now we are finishing the Facts Against Hate project. It was a 2-year project, and our work will continue with Osaavat project. So here I will briefly introduce the Facts Against Hate project to you. The focus was especially on data collection and on local level. In Finland, the Police University College compiles statistics on hate crime that has been reported to the police annually. That has been the only information that has been published annually. There's no other regular information sources. We wanted to support gathering new information that would complement the picture the police statistics are giving us. We also wanted to focus on local level, since the local level is where the negative trends can be identified and addressed. This project was coordinated by the Ministry of Justice, and our partners were Ministry of Interior and Police University College. And we also had 3 NGO partners: Anti-Racist Forum from Finland, Center for Peace Studies in Croatia, and EINAR from Ireland. And this project, and also the others we are doing, are funded by the Rights, Equality and Citizenship program of the European Commission. So here I will briefly present some of the results of the Facts Against Hate project, some of the activities we implemented. And I will focus on the activities that are most relevant from the LGBTI perspective. Underreporting is a major concern, as we already heard today. Also, this is the case in Finland. Very few cases are reported to the police, and even fewer cases actually proceed to courts. In Finland, I think we can safely say that this is especially a problem with hate crime targeting LGBTI people and also people with disabilities. To tackle this underreporting, we organized trainings for LGBTI people and also people with disabilities. All trainings were organized together with NGOs, and their input has been extremely valuable in organizing these trainings and getting the right target group to join our trainings. We also produced material. On my slide, you can see the front page of a material we produced on LGBT people and hate crime. Also with these materials, the cooperation with NGOs was really important. This especially was the case with the visual design of the material and the graphics. In addition to this material, we also produced material, for example, in easy-to-read format, in Sami languages, and in sign language. We have learned that there is a need for material that has a clear target group, not just general material that is supposed to be suitable for all. We also wanted to gather more information from civil society. Our NGO partners in Finland, in Croatia, and in Ireland established reporting platforms in order to gather more information on hate incidents. As I said before, the Police University College publishes every year statistics on hate crime that have been reported to the police. We wanted to know more on what happens to these cases after they have been reported to the police. That is why we published a report on hate crimes and their handling in the criminal process. This report followed cases that had been reported to the police in 2017, from the pre-trial investigation to prosecution and then ending up in courts. The focus was on investigating how hate crimes are identified and also how the hate motive affects the severity of the sentence. This report revealed some shortcomings in the identification of hate crimes, and it also showed that it is really rare that the hate motive actually resulted in increasing the punishment. And when we only look at the cases where the LGBTI people have been the target of a hate crime, there were no increased punishments found in the report. This means that we have to still be making capacity building activities with authorities, and to support this capacity building, we prepared a mandatory virtual training to all police officers. At the moment, more than 5,000 police officers have completed this training. We have around 7,000 police officers in Finland, so that's the majority that have already completed training. In recent years, there have been many trainings for police officers, but there are still many police officers that haven't had any training on hate crimes, and that's why we felt that having a mandatory training is what we actually needed, not just training for those that are already interested in the issue. Also, cooperation has been done in all project activities. This project implementation has tried to bring together stakeholders that in our view should or could be working together closer, especially on a local level. We also published a guidebook for local actors like municipalities, and it gives tools for preventing hate acts. Some words on the next steps, what we should be doing next after the project. So many activities have been implemented. Still some of the same challenges remain, but also some new challenges have risen, like systematic harassment against activists. The next step we're going to make in Finland is to pilot a center of expertise in work against hate crime and discrimination. This work is carried out in our new project called Osaavat. It translates into capable in English. From previous projects, we have learned that coordination should be organized in a more systematic way and not as a project-based activity. Also, I think we have found that broadening our perspective from hate crimes to hate incidents or bias-motivated actions is needed. All bias-motivated acts are harmful, and we need effective actions also in those cases where they do not constitute a crime. This also relates to the point of using the non-discrimination legislation more effectively. When we have cases which have a bias motivation, but they are not crimes, we should always explore the possibility of using non-discrimination legislation more effectively in these cases. And finally, it's clear that we should also be focusing more on certain vulnerable groups. And as heard from today in the report that was published, it is clear that LGBTI people are one of these groups where we should pay more attention to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mila. I do like the main idea of the project, that you really must know before you can do anything. And it's not about opinions or anything like that, it's about facts. Facts are facts. When you know, it really helps. And sometimes if the training has to be mandatory, then it has to be, well, better than the other options. Okay, very good. So we're going on. Gina Sjöström is a team leader. She is specialized on individual support. She works for the Swedish Federation for LGBTQI people's rights in Sweden. She has promised to tell us some practical examples on actions from her organization. Varsågod, Gina.
My name is Gina, and thank you for inviting me. As you said, I'm representing the Swedish Federation for LGBTQI rights, and I represent the civil society here today in this group of presentations, and I'm going to talk about the support we give to victims of hate crime. Yes, so you can switch to the next slide, please. Yes, so very shortly about our services. We are a small national service, but we are few people working, giving support to LGBTQI persons who have experienced harassment, threats, or abuse. And experiences of hate crime or hate incidents are common for almost all people we meet. You can be anonymous to come to us. It's free of charge. And we also give advice and give support to friends and relatives of victims. And we've been a national support since 1998. And we are employed staff, but we are only three persons. And of course, that doesn't cover the need of all LGBTQI people in Sweden, but that's what we have resources for. And we also give trainings and counseling for other professionals. Next slide, please. Yes, the support we offer. So I'm going to focus on the support. We give both emotional and practical support. The emotional support could be in physical meetings or by phone, video, email, with people all over the country. It could be like emergency support when something recently happened, or it could be a longer contact when you need to, you want to talk through what you've experienced and how it affected you for a longer time. And we give advice and safety planning if it's needed. And the practical support is a lot about informing how the system works. If you want to make a police report, or if you need to get help from the social services or medical help. We can also accompany to the police station, or if it goes to trial, also we report incidents for other people. If they feel more comfortable in not, of course you have to give your name, but if some people think it's nice not to be the one reporting the crime, it feels safer. And we also have a sheltered accommodation where people can stay if they are threatened, and it's in together with the social services. Next slide, please. And I can also just mention that, of course, we have collaboration with the police and with lawyers when it comes to the legal system and when people are reporting. But of course there are, and I'm not going to go into depth about this, but there are a lot of barriers to reporting. There is still, even though, like we already mentioned, a lot of people think it's really easy to live as an LGBTQI person in the Nordic countries, but that's not always the case. And we have a lot of hate incidents and other discrimination happening. So there is a distrust in the society's supporting mechanism from our community. And there's a fear of that the response will be prejudiced if you turn to the social the authorities. And there also could be like a normalization of violence, that you're so used to experiencing verbal attacks or minor hate incidents that you don't even think it's worth reporting, or you think it's not worth reporting because you know it's a hard, like several mentioned before, it's very few cases that actually lead to trial with the hate crimes motive still there. So maybe you prioritize your well-being and want to get on with your life. And of course, there's also could be a fear of the consequences of coming out officially, because if you report that you have experienced, for example, homophobic hate crime and you're gay, or someone thinks you're gay, that would be coming out. So I'm maybe a bit provoking question, but I of course we encourage reporting, police reporting, but I think the support is a really important part in giving if we want to reach more victims of hate crime. Next slide, please. When we work with hate crime, it's important to have a very victim-centered approach, to give back control to the person, to feel, the feeling of having control of your life. Like I mentioned, both practical and emotional support, and to be very flexible. All people doesn't want the same and don't need the same. Some people want to report, others doesn't, and maybe I can encourage, but I will never push anyone to report. But everyone should have the opportunity to take and to make a decision that's informed. So a lot of information is also needed, like what would happen if you make a report, what will happen if you do this and that. And of course, our services also offer a safe space to be an LGBTQI organization offering support. A lot of people feel very safe and to be here and talk about our experiences and feel that we are a lot of people having similar experiences. Next slide, please. And so the civil society and the NGOs have been mentioned before, and I just want to stress, like, it's so important role in all the. If you read research about hate crime and reports, and also internationally or in the Nordic countries, you always a lot of come back to the importance of the NGOs. And just to have this role of reducing the distrust and provide information and to be a safe space. We have, as I mentioned, cooperation with the national police. We have in Sweden their specialized hate crime units within the police, and it's really good that we have this contact with them, and they can refer clients to us. And also within other authorities, we have discussions, and we, like within RFSL, we provide trainings for the police and for other authorities sometimes. And there's also important to have a lot of cooperation with other civil society organizations. Like the biggest one in Sweden for victim support is the Victim Support Sweden, Brottsofferjouren Sverige, and they have improved their work with hate crime and together with the police these last year in a very good way. So they are really good also in giving support. And I think the cooperation between us and between organizations working with different motives of hate is also important. And that's something that lacks. And also I wrote funding. Civil society needs funding. Otherwise, and especially with the political climate nowadays, so we need to make sure that the civil society has funding and to give this support to hate crime victims. Next slide, and that's thank you.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you for the very practical and very good examples on what you have been doing and what you are still doing and what you are developing for the moment. Now we have some time for a discussion. It is a combination of online participants, and one of the participants is Mila, who is here. So Mila, would you please have a seat? And we will have Gina and Ole on the screen. And now, my dear people, you have a very good opportunity of sending your questions and comments via chat to my telephone here. I try to cope with this. This is a new telephone, so I'm a bit, yeah, okay. Still waiting. Good. Okay, so my dear friends Mila and Ole and Gina, You have been listening to each other now, these presentations. I would like to ask all of you what you have now learned from each other by listening to each other. Would everyone mention one good example or one good practice or one good idea from another Nordic country, something that you could also use in your own country as well? Who would like to start? Ole, would you like to start?
Sorry. Yeah. So if I'm going to start, I paid attention to what Gina said about the specialized unit in Swedish police that is specialized in hate crimes. That sounds very interesting. We don't have them in Denmark, so that would be something that could like lift this area, I guess.
Okay. Gina, would you like to go on from this?
Yes, we've heard about mandatory training for the police, which is really good. I mean, there's some in Sweden as well, but I think that the knowledge is always needed more knowledge within the law system and within the police. And I also thought it was the Danish campaign. I think things like these are needed again and again. There's been campaigns in Sweden from the police and authorities, but as soon as they get a couple of years old, then some people forget, and some people were too young where they were sent. So that's a good example of trying to reach out to people and through the different stakeholders.
Okay. And Mila, what would you like to bring up?
I was also inspired with the example from the Danish police. I think that we have had a lot of campaigns on underreporting, but it's usually the NGOs that are campaigning against it. And when it is the police, it sends a message that the police is ready and willing to receive reports on hate crime and also be sensitive when these reports come to the police officers. So since one of the reasons behind the underreporting is that the victims do not trust authorities or the police in that case, and when police is campaigning, it sends a message that they will be taking the case seriously. So I think that's a very good example.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the police. They are anyway key organization here in fighting against hate crime. Ole, how would you describe the attitudes of the police officers in Denmark?
The attitude towards
LGBTIQ people and these questions, and how would you describe their level of knowledge on these topics and so on, their willingness for action?
So we try to educate our police officers as good as we can. Every police officer is going to mandatory training in the basic education, and when they are police officers, they can receive some further training in this area. And we try all the time to emphasize that this is a very important area, but it is also very difficult because there are so many police officers who actually should know about this area when they are spotting a crime on the street. Is it a hate crime or is it not a hate crime? You have to have this common knowledge of this area enabled to see the hate crimes. So that is a thing we try to educate our people as good as we can, but there's a lot of people who have contact with potential hate crime victims.
In Denmark, there are also many people coming from abroad, from countries in which these people of the target groups can be very frightened of the police because they have bad experiences. How do you campaign against that?
Yeah, I think the key stakeholders is a key here, and having this tight dialogue with in our we have a dialogue with the Muslim community in Denmark, and we're talking having these dialogue meetings, and I think they are very fruitful. And as I told you in my little presentation, we went to a mosque and hold a presentation to tell that the police is there for them, and you could safely turn to the police. They will listen to you when you file a report.
So you need to be very proactive from police side. Ole told us that LGBTIQ questions are part of the basic education of police officers in Denmark. Should it be like that in Finland too?
Well, yes, of course. If police has to understand the hate motive, they should separate between different discrimination grounds and understand the realities of minorities that are making the complaints to authorities. So, of course, the basic training also should include information on LGBTI people.
Okay, yeah, a good idea indeed. Gina, would you like to comment on behalf of? Well, I know that you are not representing Swedish police in this debate. You are representing your own organization. But anyway, what kind of experiences do you have in your organization about the police's attitudes and knowledge and ability to cope with this type of crime?
I would say that it's very different depending on what person you meet or what region, or so there are several examples of very good treatment and ways of reporting and collaboration with the police, and giving a very getting back to the victims and telling them what will happen next. But there are also, unfortunately, still bad examples when people feel they haven't been heard, and it's been diminished, like their experience were not taken seriously and things like that. So I would say that the problem is that it still differs, that it's not like a common, that it could be such a different depending on what person you meet, and that's a problem.
Does it also depend on if you are in a big city or at the countryside?
I wouldn't say. I think there are good and bad examples all over. So I can't see a difference like that.
Okay, good. Well, then we are going with the differences, but another type of differences. I would like to ask the three of you, as you have been now listening to each other, these three presentations, what kind of differences do you identify in the approach of different Nordic countries in these practical examples and steps, or attitudes, or ideas, or in any dimension? Who would like to begin? What kind of differences? Ole.
That was actually haven't spotted a clear difference. I think we actually looks like each other in certain ways. So I don't actually have a clear example of where we are different from each other.
Did you recognize differences between the approaches?
Well, I think it's easier to find similarities than differences, because the legal approach is somewhat similar, and also how it has evolved, and also all the countries are at the moment active in these issues, and we have policy responses in all of the countries. So I think it's easier to find similarities. But I think that one thing that where we have differences is in the specialization of the police forces. In some of the Nordic countries, they have specialized hate crime units, and in some countries there is not so much, isn't that kind of level of specialization inside of the police force. So that might be one of the differences I can recognize.
In which Nordic countries are there different, separate units for this type of crimes at the police?
Well, I know at least that Norway and Sweden has some degree of specialization, but we in Finland do not. I'm not so sure about Denmark. Maybe Ole can tell us a bit more on that.
Okay. Ole, would you like to answer this question? Are there specialized police officers in Denmark?
Yeah, as the first thing I said was that we would like some specialized team in this area. I think that could really help the area, and look into Norway and Sweden could be maybe a model. But again, it's a prioritize. You have to, there's a lot of different areas that we have to be present in. But yeah, I guess in the future maybe we will have this specialized team for hate crimes.
Okay, and then the question of differences for Gina. What did you hear?
Oh, I don't think I have any more examples. I don't feel like I'm that I don't have that knowledge about the different countries, so I can't. So another question, please.
Yeah, and as Mila said, it might be easier to find similarities, which we have also been listening to here. Okay, every one of you, you had concrete ideas of the next steps that should be taken. But I would like you to repeat the most important points. Also, after having listened to each other, what are the next very concrete steps either in your country or in your organization? One or two examples from everybody from who should do what next. Who would like to start? Mila, would you like to start?
Well, yes, please. Thank you. I already mentioned that we are piloting the Center of Expertise in work against hate crime and discrimination. That's the concrete step we're going to take, that we will be testing how a permanent and systematic coordination can be arranged in hate crime and discrimination. That's the concrete step we're going to make. But also listening to the presentations today, I think the other one we should take is to learn from the good practices, since we have a lot of similarities in the Nordic countries, and I think we should be better informed what we are doing in other countries, and also sharing the good examples, at least within law enforcement, within police officers and also prosecution, because there should be a lot of things we can learn from each other. It's the same challenges in all of the countries, and I'm sure that some challenges have already found solutions in other countries.
Okay, so you would suggest more coordination and more co-working, sharing of information. All right. How about then, Gina? Would you like to answer this question?
Yes, I'm thinking in the similar ways. I read in the report from Nick that in Norway there is a hate crime network. I mean, between the police and the civil society, and they meet regularly. And I thought it was really interesting that the police have often meetings with organization one-on-one, but if we meet together with different organizations representing different motives, that is also something that will make people, you realize how many similarities there are in experiencing hate crime, either if it's like because of sexual orientation or of your skin color. The similarities are so big. So I thought that was a really good example to create like network and meetings between the authorities and different NGOs at the same meetings.
Okay, thank you, Gina. And Ole.
Yeah. Very well spoken. I have nothing else to add in this with this. So
Yeah, right. So there's some problem with the voice too. I didn't hear very well. Okay, but now we have some questions coming from the audience. Thank you very much for everybody who has been sending them. Let's take here the first question from the audience. Any one of you, the three of you, might be interested in answering. This is about practical help. How important would you say practical help concerning reporting is for each victim? How can the police and other organizations implement this in a good and helpful way? So practical help concerning reporting. Who should do what to help this? Gina, please.
No, I just want to agree that it's really important to get help reporting and to be able to make this informed decision. So yes, and I think it's needed with some civil society organizations giving victim support to be involved. And the police can also refer people to victim support when someone makes a report and the other way around. I think that's really important. I don't know if that was an answer.
Is it police or NGOs or authorities or who should organize that help for the victims?
I think both.
Okay.
I think to gain more trust, it's good if it's a neutral, like victim support organization to giving the practical help. But of course, if the police can, provide that, that's also good.
Yeah. So the different sources of need would be helpful. I think this question might come from the same person. Would you say practical and informative help is essential for those experiencing hate crime on an individual level? So can we say it is essential, very necessary to get the practical help? Gina, would you like to go on with this?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's to increase the numbers of people reporting. I think you need support in that. So yes, and also to be able to feel that you are listened to and being able to go on with your life afterwards and not
Yeah. I do believe that not many people are professionals in reporting hate crime targeted to themselves. So some kind of help is needed for almost everyone in this very special situation. I also have personal experience on that. I would say it wasn't that easy. Okay, then there's another question. I think, if she had been listening to Mila, it was interesting what Mila said about the need to use Non-Discrimination Act to tackle hate acts. Are these plans to do somehow better on this? Are there plans to do somehow better on this? About the need to use Non-Discrimination Act to tackle hate acts.
Yeah. I think it's especially relevant when we're talking about harassment, which is prohibited in the Non-Discrimination Act in Finland. I think that similar acts can be reported also to the police, and they might constitute punishable hate speech in those cases. But in some cases, it would be easier for people. It has a lower threshold also for reporting it to the Non-Discrimination Ombudsman's office. And people might have like many choices they can choose in a situation when they are targeted with hate speech. And I think the concrete step, maybe that was the question, what we're going to do about it, is to raise awareness on the fact that hate speech can also be discrimination or harassment, not just something that is prohibited in the criminal code.
Okay, yeah. And okay, then there's a question about hate aspect in these processes. Aaltonen and Brax both mentioned that hate aspect tends to get lost in the justice system. Do you think this is because of formal problem with the legislation or the result of the actors within the system being privileged and uninformed about the prejudices faced by minorities? So this is about recognizing an act as a hate act. And for other people, it is too easy to say that, oh, that might not be hate act, it might be something else or something. And also it's hard to describe in the law. Mila, what would you say to this person?
I think it's more about the practicalities of the criminal process. If police doesn't ask questions that might lead them to understand that there might be a hate motive, it doesn't come up in the process. So that's why we would need more instructions on asking about the possibility of hate motive, and also putting it into the police system and then following that coding in the system. So I think it's more about the practicalities, but also victims can be afraid of mentioning that they actually suspect that there is a hate motive behind the case. I think Gina mentioned the fear of prejudiced response, that that's why people don't bring up the hate motive, and police officers need to be very sensitive in asking that, so they are not marginalizing people more. So they have to find sensitive ways of asking about the hate motive and then marking it down in the system and then investigating that thoroughly.
So that's also a question about very practical skills of those people who are then helping them. Gina, please.
Just a comment about, I know in Sweden there's been one reason why it doesn't go all the way is also because the prosecutor were too afraid to lose the case if you couldn't prove it was hate motivated. At least you could prove the abuse. So then you drop the motivation to be more sure to get a conviction. But that's been discussed within the Swedish law system. So that was also one reason why it didn't go all the way in Sweden.
Thank you. Okay, there are two more questions. We have a couple of minutes time left. The first one is about the knowledge and skills of the people who work to support the victims. Do you think victim support should receive more training to cater to different marginalized groups? Or would it be better for various organizations with specific expertise to receive funding and support to also engage in victim support? And the underlying thought here is that victim support workers who are untrained in, for instance, LGBTQI questions plus other, they might do more harm than good if they don't know what they are doing in this very sensitive situation. So should there be more training to the people who are helping the victims, or should it be different organizations for all these different marginalized groups? What do you think? Who would like to answer this? Maybe one of you would like to take this question. Gina.
Okay. Yes, I maybe lame answer, but I think both. I think it's still needed with specialized help in different to be this safe space, as I talked about. But of course, if there are bigger victim support organizations, they should be able to welcome anyone. So it's a parallel thing. But I think at the time, it's still needed to have specialized support services if it's possible.
Thank you. And the last question, I think I will give this question to Ole because he's a police officer. This is about police, but the point of view is a little bit different. What do you think about reporting also somewhere else if you don't want to contact the police? Do we need other reporting systems other than just reporting to the police? This is a nice question to a police officer, isn't it?
Yeah, I think. Yes, I think of course you should report a crime to the police. Police handles crime, and you could report to the police in various of ways. In Denmark, I'm speaking in what we do in Denmark. So you could mail us, phone us, or come to the police station. It actually doesn't matter. Reports of fake crimes should be reported to the police, I think. Having different kind of system, I don't think that's a very good way of handling these problems. And I know when I'm talking to key stakeholders, they say that people sometimes they don't want to make a report because they don't want to go to the police, and they ask if they can report through the organization, but they can't. People have to contact the police, and the organization can help them contacting the police.
The crimes are up to the police anyway, but you can get help in contacting the police and reporting. Good. Thank you very much, Ole, Gina. Thank you very much, both of you attending online. Thank you, Mila, here. Thank you, dear audience, both here and online. Thank you for very, very good and practical ideas and thoughts. Now we have more good news. We have a coffee break. That's 20 minutes, and we'll have here in Audi Library, we'll have a nice cup of coffee for everybody when you go out from the door and turn right and then walk until the other end of the building. So there will be some coffee served for you. And also you people online, you are a little bit envious of this information concerning coffee. Would you please go to your kitchens and cook your own coffees and then come back after 20 minutes. So Finnish time, that will be 3:20. See you here then. Enjoy your break. First we have Paula Lehtomäki on pre-recorded video. Let's listen to what she has to say. Paula Lehtomäki is the Secretary General of the Nordic Council of Ministers. Let's listen to Paula first.
Dear Nordic friends, Nordic cooperation is often described as value-based. We share common values and are committed to promoting them at home and internationally. The key idea of Nordic welfare models is to have everyone on board, to make it possible for everyone to blossom in our societies. This is very much the question when we talk about LGBTI persons' rights and opportunities in our societies. In numerous countries and regions in the world, homo and bisexual, trans and intergender people's rights and opportunities are under severe pressure. In Nordic region, it should be different. This is why we, through the Nordic cooperation, are stepping up to promote equal rights, equal treatment, and equal opportunities for LGBTI persons. In 2020, the Nordic Council of Ministers for Gender Equality formally expanded their work to cover LGBTI. Now we cooperate on preventing marginalization, furthering inclusion, and strengthening the active citizenship of them. This work is both very principled and extremely concrete. As an example, we recently launched the report Health, Well-being and Life Conditions of Young LGBTI Persons in the Nordic countries. Ministers published an open letter urging other governments to recognize human rights and to do better. The letter and the new report are the few steps of many aiming to improve the global discussions and ultimately lives of the thousands of people in the Nordics and beyond who identify as a sexual and gender minority. Nordic region aims at being the most sustainable and integrated region of the world by 2030. Social sustainability is a vital part of this vision. We must not leave anyone behind. This is clearly seen in the work of Nordic Council of Ministers, as we have pledged to work purposefully with LGBTI issues as a cross-sectoral policy area, dedicating a special focus to discrimination, hate crime, and the well-being of LGBTI children and youth. The Nordic countries have historically been frontrunners in ensuring the rights of girls and women. Now the time is for us to truly be the same for LGBTI people. In line with the political decisions taken, the Nordic Council of Ministers will be a firm voice in promoting LGBTI rights and a partner in bringing about Nordic added value. We look forward to a constructive dialogue to pave the way for a more inclusive society together. Thank you.
Okay, so we go on with the topic. We have here 4 people participating in this discussion about Nordic cooperation as a tool in promoting LGBTI people's safety in the Nordic countries. I will introduce them one by asking them the same question at first. The question is about the report, which is the topic of the day. The report about hate crimes targeting to LGBTIQ people in the Nordic countries. So the first here beside me is Line Christmas Möller. She comes from the same organization as Paula Lehtomäki. She works for the Nordic Council of Ministers, and she is a project manager for gender equality and LGBTI people. Welcome, Line. So after reading the report, what would you like to emphasize? What was the most remarkable point of view in the report in your eyes?
Well, thank you for the question. Thank you for having me. So my point of view is, how can the Nordic Council of Ministers be a platform for cooperation? And I was struck by how NGOs were heavily featured in the report, and how policy implementation and trainings and support for victims all relies so heavily on NGOs, and how I was thinking about how we could, at the Nordic level, work more on that.
Thank you, Line. The next one is Eirun Eiðarsdóttir. She is assistant professor from Iceland University of Akureyri. After reading the report, what would you like to say, Eirun?
Well, thank you for inviting me here today. I'm very happy to be here. I would say that the first thing that came to mind is that I was very happy to see it being published. And I think it's really something that is needed in the Nordic context for the countries to work more closely together, learn from each other. In the case of Iceland, because I know this subject very well from different perspectives in Iceland. And I think that we are a bit behind some of the other Nordic countries. So I think this report can be very useful for Iceland to maybe take a step forward.
Thank you, Eirun. We're happy to have you here. The third one is Paul Tore Haga. He is police superintendent, head of the Western Police District from Norway. Welcome, Paul Tore. What would you like to say of the report?
Thank you very much for the good question, and thank you for having me here in this conference. After reading the report, I think that there is a lot of very good initiatives in the Nordic countries regarding combating and preventing this very serious form of crime, hate crime. From a police point of view, I work in, as you said, West Police District, and I'm there the head of preventing hate crime, radicalization to violent extremism. What I would like to emphasize is the the good need for national resource groups in the police. In Norway, we've had since 2014 a specialized group in Oslo, and I also read that Sweden had 3 specialized groups. The police, we need knowledge about the legislation, of course, but we also need knowledge about, for example, what David Brax told us about the impacts on hate crime, personal level, on societal level. And maybe, from my point of view, the most important thing is that the police are very professional in our meeting with the offended people of hate crime. We meet people with integrity, empathy, respect, and listen very carefully. Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned David Brax. We would like to have him on the screen because he's also participating this discussion. Could we have David's face on the screen? Before I ask Kerttu Tarjamo, she is Secretary General of SETA Finland. Kerttu, what did you think when reading the report?
Well, my thoughts, I think the first thought is that it's taken us quite a long time to recognize LGBTI people as a group that does encounter hate crime in the Nordic countries. We tend to be content that this is the best place in the globe, in the whole world, to be LGBTIQ, and I think the sort of discrimination and hate crime that people do face in their daily lives has not received enough attention. I think it's a good thing that there are initiatives in different Nordic countries going. What I'm a bit worried about is that quite often they are project-based, which does not give continuity to the work. And also, I think what I'm quite astonished about is about how difficult it is to get gender identity and gender expression and sex characteristics into hate crime legislation as grounds for biased hate crime.
Okay, we'll talk more about the legislation thing later. Thank you, Kerttu. And then via the cameras, we have David Brax. You hear us, David? Okay, what did you think when reading the report? What would you like to emphasize or bring up?
Well, I wrote part of the report as well, so I have quite close relation to it. Well, there are 2 things you could say. One is the positive thing. Of course, there's a lot of initiatives, as a lot of you have pointed out, and that's very good. At the same time, I've been working with the hate crime issues and hate crime research since 2011. There has been a lot of initiatives of this kind, and there's a lot of repetition of the same issues. So if I can be critical of the thing that I'm actually writing, is that it's very important that you don't stop at just making another report. Yeah, you have to the report points out what needs to be done, what questions need to be solved. And then you need to do those things and solve those issues, not just have another meeting and have another report itemizing what have been done before. So I think it's extremely important that you have a critical eye on these issues, because hate crime is so important, so symbolically important. It's very easy to have meetings where you just congratulate each other for having the right set of values and saying that this is important. It's important to also invite critical voices that point out the limitations and the risks involved in having a symbolic doing symbolic work, because you can get away with doing very little if you do the symbolically right thing. So that's my takeaway message from reading this report.
Well, I can give you a more precise question. I meant that when you worked with all this material, and that was a long process, you had already been working with these questions for a long time before you began with this work. Was there something that was especially surprising or something like worrying or delightful or something in the situation that you would like to bring up? Was there something that surprised you in this work?
Not well. I have been aware of what was going on before. It's what surprised me is that it's the same thing that going on in all the countries, and we very rarely refer to other Nordic countries. Each country is very, very reluctant to refer to the work done in other Nordic countries, even though we have the same sort of challenges and the same sort of cases, the same sort of development. So that was quite surprising.
David. Right. I would like to ask you some more specific questions combining the situation and the societies we now live in and the political movements and everything that there is. And I would also like to get answers to the question, what can be done, which is our main question of the day. And of course, the possibility of our Nordic cooperation in these questions. I'm personally very interested in the impact of far-right populist movements at the moment. One of them is maybe, or is it one of them or another movement then, but that anti-gender movement that a couple of people already mentioned here this afternoon. How do you see the impact of these very extremist movements on the safety of LGBTIQ people for the moment? Who would like to answer this question? Aaron, would you like to begin?
Yes, thank you for this question. I think it's a very good one. I think that mostly it is normalizing the hate or the bias, or normalizing that it's allowed and okay to talk disrespectfully to others, especially like LGBTIQ groups and of course other minority groups. So I think that's maybe the main thing that we need to fight against. I have actually published an article based on my research in Iceland on hate speech in Iceland. And it demonstrated very clearly how normal it is to put out hate as opinions. Mm-hmm. And if you are not allowed to put out opinions, you are living in a regime that, will not allow you to speak. It's so extreme, these discussions about it. So we need to, I think, approach it with a different discussion. Approach it with, the equal right of people just being left alone and being allowed to be who they are in peace.
It's really good to have these Nordic seminars as we now get to know, for instance, these interesting facts from Iceland. I didn't know that you also have this problem of the hate speech and that very impolite way of communicating. Another question for you, Aaron. How would you describe it? When did it begin? Why do the Icelanders have now interest in this kind of hate speech?
I think it has probably existed just as long as it has existed elsewhere. I think maybe just it hasn't been researched a lot and it hasn't been discussed a lot in Iceland. I cannot point out when exactly it started, but I can say that before my career at the university, I was a police officer and I led a project within the Reykjavik Metropolitan Police on being the first police officer dedicating to fight hate crime. And that was in 2016, January 2016. And there was almost no acceptance in society for this work. Mm-hmm. Lot of opinions against it, even from people of parliament, openly discussing that this should not be done in Iceland. We should not fight hate crime. We should not fight hate speech in particularly. So this was kind of, I could clearly see then that it was a problem area that would be very difficult to start to open up a dialogue about.
Okay.
And being now at the university from 2018, because of my interest from then, I decided to do academic research on the matter, and it shows clearly that there are hate crime and hate speech and discrimination in Iceland, just like elsewhere.
Okay. And that sounds really very much like the discussion we have here in Finland too. Kerttu, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think it's really important to recognize that the anti-gender movements are influencing the discussion on LGBTIQ rights in Nordic countries. And I think in Finland we saw it became more vocal during the marriage equality discussions in Finland, and when especially the organization The Real Marriage was established in Finland, which is very closely linked to the anti-gender movements in Europe. And what they're doing is that they're legitimizing hate against LGBTIQ people, but they're doing it more sophisticated. Instead of just before we could hear religious arguments against LGBTIQ people's rights, but these arguments are using the human rights language. They're talking about freedom of speech, freedom of religion as something that they're defending against the LGBTIQ ideology. And I think we can see this rhetoric in Finnish discussions as well. And we did through discussions with our colleagues in other Nordic countries. This is happening all over, and we can hear the influence. And it's important to, while I think, for example, in Finland, it's still quite a small group that is active in it. There are other groups like the right-wing populists that are able to sort of unite, and they're able to use this rhetoric to oppose something, and there is more force that is countering LGBTI issues in Finland. It's not a coincidence that the Finnish government has not been able to reform the trans legislation in the past 10 years. We can hear those arguments in the discussions about trans people's rights. And I think it's something you have to recognize it, and you have to take action to counter those narratives. We need public officials who understand that this is something that is not just a coincidence. There's an international movement that is pushing forward these arguments. They're well financed, and for example, the LGBTIQ organizations, for instance, in Finland, we have one professional media officer working in the whole field. That one person is not enough to counter the rhetoric and the anti-gender movement. And we need a lot more information to raise awareness, to counter misconceptions. For example, we need people to speak out about freedom of religion and freedom of speech, that they do not include the right to discriminate others. That is clearly established, for example, in the case law of the European Court of Human Rights. And we need more information. And I think this is something that a lot more effort needs to be put in all of the Nordic countries.
Kerttu, you mentioned a very interesting thing, which is that international cooperation between those someones who organize, for instance, anti-gender movement, and there is funding you mentioned, and there is everything, and then the same themes exist in every country. So what do we know about these international forces doing something? Do we know anything? Do we know enough? Should we know more? Who is organizing anti-gender movement? Where is the money coming from? What's the point? Who are the people leading that movement?
Well, I think first of all, it's a movement, but it's not centrally led. Mm-hmm. There are groups of people. It's bringing together groups of people that are opposing women's rights, sexual and reproductive rights, and LGBTIQ people's rights. It's also people who, for example, oppose or are bringing together also racist groups who are people who are protecting the nation somehow. And I think it's important to that it's different groups that find a common enemy in order to oppose the sort of democracy and human rights developments in society. And we know that there is the Catholic Church is one force behind it. There are a lot of groups in the United States and especially organizing in the United States, which is also behind funding for these kind of activities globally. And sometimes it's easy to think that now you're just getting paranoid. But I think it's quite well researched that these movements actually exist, and we can see it how the rhetoric has changed from country to country, and certain groups starting to exist in also in Nordic countries. Because I think if you follow the discussions on LGBTIQ issues, even though we've always had groups that are opposed LGBTI people's rights, the sort of 10 years ago, I don't think you could imagine the kind of discussion that is okay now. Like you said, that it's being normalized. I think 10 years ago, we didn't imagine that it would be possible at this time again. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, but this is something very strange. We can see that those movements exist, but we can give almost no names or anything of their functions. Paul Ture, you represent the police here. Should the police know more about those movements?
My answer to that question is yes. In Norway, by 1st of January 2021, sexual identity and sexual expression was taken into the penal code. And preventing hate speech and investigating hate speech is, of course, have a high prioritize in Norwegian, led by the top prosecution. But what I identify in the police is that we need to do what we in West Police District did, especially in 2019, was to be proactive, go out to the community, tell them how do the police prioritize hate crime, tell them that we know about the consequences in a good and sensitive way. We cannot promise that every case will lead to a prosecution or a sentence, but we have to promise the offended in the case of crime that we will be close to them in communication. That is very important. But now, regarding, of course, the new legislation in Norway, we need to learn more about the anti-gender movements so that we have more knowledge to combat it. And I think that the most important thing is the work we do in the prevention area. That is the main strategy in Norway, to be ahead of the crime. And to be ahead of the crime, we need knowledge about who commits the crime, where does the crime happen, and who can we work together with. And when I come back from this seminar on 16th of December, I am having a meeting with the local representative of the LBHT organization in Bergen called Free, because they are a very important resource in this preventing and combating hate speech and hate crime towards LBHT community. But we need more knowledge, yes.
Yes, good. Dear everybody, don't forget the chance of sending your comments and questions by chat. Here, they are coming here to my WhatsApp. There's one good question, we'll take it a little bit later. The other thing I'm very interested in is the impact of religious groups, especially Christian extremist movements. What do you think about these in the Nordic contexts? Kerttu.
Well, I think in the Nordic context, at least, I mean, in Finland, for example, it's important to, I mean, we've always had some Christian fundamentalist groups that have been opposing LGBTIQ rights. They are a minority of people, but they can be very vocal. And especially when, I mean, there are some religious groups, for example, that can be behind so-called conversion therapies that can be promoting that. They are a force that can be promoting discrimination of LGBTI people in the Nordic countries. But still, I think if we talk about religion and LGBTIQ people, we often talk about the opposition towards LGBTI people's rights. But then if we only talk about that, we, for example, forget those people who are LGBTIQ and religious. So I think maybe when we talk about religion and LGBTIQ people, we should shift the discussion to, well, how to secure LGBTIQ people's right to exercise, for example, religion.
Yeah, that's a very good point indeed. They also have the freedom of religion, which they then can't have if there is very much hate against them in the religious groups. Okay. David, if you want to give your comments, just let me know. Would you like to comment on these topics here?
Sure. Well, the two things, I don't have an answer to the question about religious fundamentalists, but the former question, if I may, I think I have a bad connection. I'm sorry about that. Okay. So there are two things about the right-wing populist movement. The first is regarding their political success. So there's a great, as I mentioned in the keynote, there's a great deal of worry in targeted communities that this group will get more political influence, and that will have a negative impact on the work that's being done to prevent hate crime, hate speech from taking place. The other thing is an issue where further studies are needed, and that is the relation between the success of those parties, those movements, and the prevalence of hate crimes. It's not that clear. There is a proportional relationships. We don't know what are the causes of spikes in hate crime incidents. Sometimes it seems to be when the targeted communities win something. That is when targeted communities get recognized and their rights get recognized. That can cause a spike in hate crime taking place. And on the other side, it can be the result of right-wing parties, for instance, having a good election, because that emboldens some people to take action against these groups. And it's very important to work out how these events fit together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Gertrude,
thank you.
And then Eirun.
Yeah, just I wanted to sort of point out that when we talk about whether it's the anti-gender movements or the religious opposition to LGBTI rights, I think it's important to acknowledge them as a force in the discussions and in society. But this is what they're able to do. They're able to take hostage, the discussions as hostage, and we get stuck into discussing them instead of actually talking about the fact that we know from statistics that LGBTI people are targeted by hate crime and discrimination. We know from the Eurobarometer, for example, that most people in Europe and the EU, they support that LGBTI people would have the same rights as other people. And for example, there is great support for in Finland for providing information on sexual orientation and gender diversity in schools. These are facts, and we should work on these facts instead of sort of trying to become afraid of these voices that are used to manipulate the discussions. And I think that's why it's important that we acknowledge them, but then we move on to what actually the people are facing, and then try to find ways to solve the problems.
Thank you. Eirun.
Yes, I wanted to add to what David was saying, and referring to Barbara Perry, who is a leading scholar on hate crime, a Canadian criminologist. She talks a lot about, people putting out hate crime or hate speech. It's a way of letting people know, bringing a message to people to stay where you are, not to demand too much. So that kind of allows minority groups to have visibility up to a specific, context. So as soon as people start to demand a little bit more visibility or more rights, those groups start to, react very, very harshly. In 2017, the Icelandic LGBTI Association filed charges against hate speech because of a discussion that had been in media and radio regarding a course they were going to give to students in a school in Iceland. And it was very visible in these, all the discourse around that, how that was visible. People were saying, well, we don't have anything against gay people. They can be gay. That's okay. Just don't impose it onto our children. Don't make our children become gay. You just stay gay where you are. And this is kind of what, we need to take the discussion from, because if we look at it this way, then all talk about hate speech and hate crime or discrimination is, in fact, about equality. And it's an equality discussion.
Yeah, you are definitely right. There are two very good questions about crime prevention and different types of measures. I combine these two questions and I'd be happy to answer and to hear the answer from any one of you. Do you have any ideas how to use soft methods to tackle the root reasons behind the hate? How to diminish fear that raises hate? And what form of crime prevention work has been shown to be effective against hate crimes and populism? So what kind of crime prevention work and what kind of soft methods could be used in this work? Polture and then Kerttu.
Thank you. Regarding to prevent a hate crime, we use in Bergen what we call a Bergensmodell. That is an education we give to specific persons who we concede can be mentors in the preventing work against radicalization to violent extremism. And we know that committing hate crime is often or sometimes part of the radicalization process. This Bergensmodellen is an action that is anchored in the action plan to Bergen Kommune, Bergen Municipality, along with the police, and a special resource center which we call RVTS West, who are specialized people in knowledge about violence, trauma, radicalization, and prevention of suicide. When we have people committing hate crime, and in cases where we also fear radicalization, we offer them a mentor, a resource person, to guide these persons back to the so-called normal society. We know for a fact that people who are committing hate crime or people who are in the radicalization process, sometimes they are out of the school system, they are out of work, and they lack protective factors in their daily life. Then we can come in and offer them this mentor. It's voluntarily to help them get back to, call it, the normal society. Go to apply for a job, going back to school. But another thing is dialogue. Talking, discussions is a very important preventive measure, and to share knowledge with one another. The police, municipality, and the organizations representing the LGBTI communities. And we have to start, oh, I get so excited. Maybe one of the most important things is we have to start early. We have to start in the kindergarten. And I'm a police officer, I'm not a politician, so I have to be careful with what I advocate, but we have to start when the children are small.
Yeah.
To build empathy, to build respect, to build good attitudes to one another. And we in the Nordic countries, we are lucky, we are rich countries, and from that we benefit in a lot of ways, but to start early. Kindergarten, ground school, and up.
Yeah.
Long answer to a short question, sorry.
That was a good answer. So that's very much about psychology and social work and just normal human interaction between people. not very, very strange measures indeed. Who was the next one? Was it Kerttu? Did you have something on mind?
Yeah, I think countering hate crime and hate speech, I mean, it's a question about doing awareness raising, training. We know that most professionals, whether we talk about police or social or in health sector or schools, they're not trained on diversity or non-discrimination issues in their basic trainings. So we need that work to be done, and it has to be that work has to be done in the structures have to be made so that that work is being done. It's just not enough to that, for example, NGOs do some projects here and then. You have to put it into the sort of basics of the education, and like what I said, that we need a lot of awareness raising, but also we need resources to dismantle the misinformation that is out there, and we need that needs to be done a lot. And it's not like I think countering also hate crime and hate speech. We need much also legislative measures in the society. I mean, the Nordic countries need to have legislation in place which allows legal gender recognition for trans people. We have to promote legislation that actually improves people's lives, because we still have legislation that is producing the discrimination in our society. We have to have legislation which can make non-binary people visible in our society. So it's not just one or two things that you do to counter. You have to have a systematic approach to counter discrimination and violence.
Line.
Yes, I wanted to address your question about softer methods, because I think that is where the Nordic cooperation, the Nordic governments can really play a role. And so earlier this year, when World Pride was held in Copenhagen, Minister Blomqvist and his colleagues got together and wrote an article to really make it very clear and take a stand in terms of other governments around the world that are not recognizing the human rights of LGBTI people. And so they wrote an article together and posted it. So I think it is this sort of normative work that's important as well to have as the Nordic region as a region is there's a demand to hear what the countries have to say, and together as a region it is a very strong message. Yeah.
Thank you, Line. Then I think there is a good question for David. As you know the report profoundly. There's a question about how to address hate crimes targeted specifically against trans people. So do you have any recommendations to Nordic Council of Ministers to protect trans rights?
That's a difficult question. Okay, so the problem, as I mentioned in the keynote, is that we don't know what works. So we have had protection of transgender people in Swedish legislation now for 5 years, and I don't know of any evaluation of whether how these cases are being treated has improved or not. And of course, that's necessary in order to answer that question. So I think evaluation is necessary, and then take the lessons from that evaluation and implement that in other countries that are facing similar challenges. So unfortunately, I don't have a straightforward, concrete answer to that question, because more need to be done to make sure that it works.
Would anyone else? Paul Ture, please.
I would just say that I forgot to say it earlier, that the police, we need to build, it's been said earlier today several times, but we need to build trust reading the report for this seminar today, I saw that in the survey for Norway for 2019 on how the trust in the public is in the police, only 2 out of 10 came to the police to report that they were a victim of hate crime. And that sends a very important message. We have to build trust. And what I mean by that is that, of course, we cannot promise everybody that what you are reporting for first is a crime, or that it will end up in the court and so on. But we have to show that we have integrity, we have knowledge, and all the right skills to meet these individuals. And that is a big challenge. We are a lot of thousands of police officers in the Nordic and Norway, but this knowledge needs to go out to every police officer responding to a crime, responding to a message. So trust, very important.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the introduction to my next and last question, which is about trust and confidence and institutions, and the strengthening of the institutions and the Nordic cooperation. So I would like to have a brief answer from every one of you to the question: who should do what to strengthen Nordic cooperation in these processes? Who would like to start? Is it you, Line?
Thank you for the question. So one of the things that the Nordic ministers put in their strategy for the LGBTI policy area, that is quite new still, is being accountable to civil society and to help strengthening civil society networks. And as we've heard in this report, civil society plays a huge role in rolling this work out into the community. So we, specifically the ministers, started a fund that is administered by Nick, who also produced this report. So the fund is open for applications every year, and like that is one of the ways that we can kind of fuel a Nordic cooperation between organizations of 3 or more countries, and to get kind of a feedback loop into the politics as well. So what is happening in the community, working together, and then feeding back into the policy level.
Thank you, Line. Eirun, would you like to take the next?
Yes, where to start? I think in regarding to Icelandic context, to begin there, I think it's important that fighting against hate crime and hate speech discrimination should be top to bottom. It should be the authorities who kind of demanded from the police and from the prosecutor offices to work on these issues, and they would have to prove that they are doing it, because I think it's too easy for institutions like police and others to have like window dressing, kind of pretending they're doing things, but they aren't actually doing anything. So I think there need to be something that, institution or something that kind of, ask for evidence that you are actually doing something. And I think that should be a good start. And also the Nordic cooperation for kind of, these are very similar societies in many ways, very similar legislations. I think there are so many grounds for just implementing more or less the same maybe ways of doing it within the police in those different countries. That's my main point, I think.
Thank you, Eirun.
Maybe the national police directorates in each country should be even more specific when they send out, and we have to report 3 times a year on how we are doing, on the specifics that the national police directorate order us to prioritize. Maybe they should be even more specific in the demands they send to the police districts on hate crime, so that we see that, so it's even more clear in everyday work that we have to prioritize this. We already know we have to prioritize it, but maybe the National Police Directorate should be even more concrete in their message to the local police. And otherwise follow up the strategic plan action plan decided for 2021 to 2024 by the Nordic Council of Ministers on making the Nordic countries the most sustainable and including region in the world. A lot of good actions there.
Yeah, you're right.
Well, I think the work on LGBTIQ needs to be institutionalized into the work of the Council of Ministers. It has to be ensured that it's not project work, and it has to have enough resources if you want to accomplish something. I think it can be a good platform for sharing experiences and also providing to ensure that every country doesn't do the same mistakes, simply put. But it's especially in the beginning of the work, it's really important to involve the NGOs and the civil society, and also reserve resources to involve them, because otherwise, just to make sure that it's anchored in in the reality of people. And like I think David brought up, that you need those critical voices as well for the work, and we need more marginalized groups to be involved, like the queer Sami, like LGBTIQ asylum seekers, and so on, to make sure that those voices are also heard in the work.
Thank you, Kerttu. And David, you have the last word of this discussion. So about cooperation and co-working on institutional Nordic level, what would you say? Do you hear me? There might be some problem with the connection. Okay. Okay, so thank you very much.
Can you repeat the question?
David, I said that you had the last word of this discussion. What would you like to say about the cooperation and co-working on Nordic institutional level? Who should do what?
Right. Very big question. Short answer, I think it's important to institutionalize more of the work, as many have said before today, that move away from based measures, making more things part of the institution, for a couple of reasons. One is that when you rely on governments to tell the prosecutors and police officers to prioritize, then you are relying on what the political majority wants at that moment, and that may change. I think it's important to make this part of the regular work of the authorities to as large extent as possible. And this also goes for the work that is currently being done by NGOs. It's very important, of course, and they should be given a lot of support, and we should listen to NGOs to a large extent, but we can't put too much on them. We should learn from the NGOs, but that knowledge needs to be incorporated within authorities as well, because it's not obvious how well they will be funded. As Gina mentioned, they're quite reliant on quite a few people. It only takes that a few of them quit for some reason or other, and then a lot of that competency goes lost. So it's very important that you write down and make decisions based on their knowledge that can carry on in institutional memory.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Kerttu, Polture, Eirun, Line. Thank you, everybody. So there's lots of work to do for both the Nordic Council of Ministers as well as for the authorities in different countries and politicians and NGOs and for everybody involved. Thank you very much for all these ideas of yours. Thank you. Antero Kiviniemi, Senior Policy Advisor from the European Commission, will give his comments.
So, good afternoon, everybody and everyone here. First of all, I want to thank the organizer of this seminar and this panel. And also, I want to thank you for inviting the European Commission and myself to participate and comment here today. It's indeed a big pleasure for myself to come to this northern corner of the European Union to see and hear how LGBTIQ people's rights and life are improved through intensive cooperation and through mutual examples and learning. Indeed, this corner is in many respects very exemplary area in the European Union. Indeed, my name is Antero Kiviniemi and I work in the European Commission on equal treatment issues, including Commission's priority initiative, Union of Equality. Our President Ursula von der Leyen is determined to lead and guide the EU towards a Union of Equality, towards a next generation EU, where all the citizens in their diversity, obviously including LGBTIQ people, are free to pursue their life as they choose and wish. To that, this Commission got also first ever Commissioner for Equality, Ms. Helena Dalli from Malta. Indeed, I have listened very carefully and with a lot of interest to discussion here today and this panel also. What I heard confirms what we generally already know in the European Union. Nordic countries indeed are internationally patchovers on LGBTIQ issues. Clearly, you are still among the most LGBTIQ-friendly countries in the world and in the European Union, exactly as you have been for decades already. First of all, you have very advanced legislation, among the most protecting, comprehensive and inclusive in the world. Secondly, as I have heard here today, you have this very strong wish to go forward. And this is a very good thing, hand in hand with the Commission's priorities. And thirdly, I would also underline that I see and I know that there are several national action plans on LGBTIQ issues in Nordic countries, notably in Sweden, Norway and Denmark, and congratulations for that. So I'd like to say a couple of words on what we are doing in the European Union, in the Commission right now, some words on our efforts in this regard. The starting point of our work is active and positive cooperation with all our member states and also with civil society, as this has been underlined here today. As you know, the Commission adopted EU's first ever LGBTIQ equality strategy in November last year. This strategy aims at enhancing the realization of rights of LGBTIQ people in the EU and worldwide. The strategy addresses challenges that LGBTIQ people are facing in their daily life concretely, within family, at school, in employment, in public spaces, in access to services and healthcare and so on. This strategy is a very important and solid step forward in the protection of LGBTIQ rights, and indeed we are very proud of it. To achieve its objectives, the strategy puts forward more than 80 concrete actions and measures, both targeted and through mainstreaming LGBTIQ aspect into all policy fields. Those actions are indeed categorized and systematized around 4 themes. First of all, we tackle in a determined way all discrimination. Secondly, we ensure the security of LGBTIQ people. Third, we support strongly the social inclusion of LGBTIQ people. And fourth, we enhance LGBTIQ rights actively also beyond the European Union, together with international organizations such as Council of Europe, United Nations, OECD, World Bank, and of course, Council of Europe. And also with non-EU countries, including no-EU Nordic countries, but also with the United States, Canada, and Australia. We have started now the implementation of the strategy, and this in very intensive cooperation with our member states. In May of this year, we created a new governmental expert group, which is there to support and monitor progress of LGBTIQ equality in the member states. We invited member states, representatives, and civil servants to join this group. And now we have a platform of constructive cooperation and mutual support between member states. This was a very important concrete step forward because this was something that was really missing at the European Union. Besides our Nordic member states, it's our big pleasure to have also Norway in this subgroup. Now, during last months, this subgroup indeed has discussed key elements of successful LGBTIQ policies, strategies, and action plans in depth. This work is still in progress, but as I'm here with Nordic friends, I can respect transparency, and I can tell you that we have identified 6 strategic dimensions as being the cornerstones of successful LGBTIQ policies. First of all, and this comes back to what has been said today here, we need accurate factual assessment of the situation of LGBTIQ equality and fact-based communication, because this is necessary for evidence-based policy making, for awareness raising, and also to tackle fake news and hate speech. Secondly, we must openly recognize that there are real challenges in LGBTI equality, and we have to pay particular attention to the most vulnerable, notably intersex and trans people. Our LGBTIQ strategy puts forward a helpful frame of reference in this regard. Third, we need to set clear, measurable priorities for promoting LGBTIQ equality. We have to go from statements, slogans, wishes to concrete action. 4, we have to ensure effective legal protection and proper law enforcement. We are dealing with human rights, we are dealing with fundamental rights, with EU law, national laws, and they are not always totally respected. We need effective remedies for victims, means to defend their rights. 5th, we need effective, appropriately resourced management and coordination of LGBTIQ matters, including mainstreaming, cooperation between state, regional, and local levels, and involvement of civil society. Otherwise, the implementation and enforcement may not happen. And 6th, and this is not the least point here, we need independent, systematic monitoring and evaluation of the progress. Very often we still miss tools and indicators, and we have to work on them very seriously. So we are currently finalizing corresponding EU guidelines in these lines to support the policies in the member states. These guidelines should be adopted next spring. Contribution and input from our Nordic members have been and are extremely valuable in this work. Nordic countries are indeed more or less exemplary in all those 6 dimensions. I would like to underline particularly 3 dimensions as good Nordic practices explaining your success in this field. First of all, you have transparent, inclusive, and openly involving method and tradition of making policies. Broad involvement of stakeholders, including civil society, and strong cross-sector cooperation. Secondly, I'd like to underline efficient data collection and independent, transparent evaluation of policies. You have decades-long experience here. And third, I'd like to underline strong legal protection of LGBTIQ people, including in family law and rights of trans people, and also relatively pro-social acceptance, even if I heard some words, critical voices also concerning this today. Indeed, you can be very, very proud about your achievements and methods of working. And this panel indeed is a very good example on that. But we have to recognize, as we have heard, that even in Nordic countries, the situation is not perfect, far from that. We need more efforts so that no one is discriminated, so that really in concrete terms, everybody has identical rights, and so that everybody can live without fears. Anyway, I would also underline, it's very important that you are not staying here in northern part of Europe as a separate closed group or bloc, so that you continue in a determined way your work as example worldwide and in the European Union. I really encourage you to maintain active, positive cooperation with all the countries in the world, and when needed, to come away from your comfort zone. Of course, we know that there are different starting points and different political objectives, as we have discussed today. But it's also very important that we are not searching for confrontations, looking for confrontations. It doesn't lead anywhere. All of us, we can learn from each other and we can teach each other. In all the countries in the world, in the European Union, we have good practices and unfortunately also challenges. Of course, we must be unyielding and determined. We don't trade on human rights or fundamental rights. Everybody must respect them in the European Union. In these times, I would say that you can learn and look such countries as Belgium, Malta, Italy, and Spain, for examples. Indeed, in Southern Europe, a lot of things are happening right now, and very rapidly so. They are taking big jumps forward, not just little steps gradually. And also we know that in Germany, big steps will be taken in very near future. So I want to thank you for your attention, and I want to wish all the best luck, success, and determination to our common efforts when we are going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antero. You had plenty of good news. That was the message from the European Commission was a very encouraging one. Thank you very much for that. Okay, then we will listen to the conclusive words by Corina Tammenmaa. She works for Ministry of Justice as a unit manager in the unit of autonomy and equality.
Okay, good afternoon to everybody. It is my very pleasure to say the closing words to this important event. The right to personal safety is one of our most protected human rights. According to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person, and this applies for everyone, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, sex characteristics, or any other personal characteristics. The state authorities have the duty to ensure that these rights are fulfilled. Studies and testimonies tells that this is not reality for the LGBTI people anywhere, not even in the Nordic countries. As we heard today, hate-motivated crime is a crime against persons' identity, and thus it is more serious than other forms of crime. There is evidence that the impact of violence is more severe on persons belonging to minority groups. The latest LGBTI survey carried out by the European Union Agency of Fundamental Rights also indicated that the latest hate-motivated crime had caused psychological problems for 42% of the respondents and deteriorated their health and well-being. It is obvious that we need to do better to protect the most vulnerable people in our societies and to ensure fulfillment of rights equally. I am glad that in the framework of the Finnish presidency of the Nordic Council of Ministers, we have been able to bring these efforts one step further. Today's discussion and the new Nordic mapping show that there are similarities in the Nordic countries, both in the effort to combat hate crimes against LGBTI people and in the challenges that we still face. Awareness of hate crimes has increased in recent years across the Nordic countries. As a consequence, steps have been taken to address this problem. Nordic countries have enhanced knowledge of hate crimes, developed cooperation between officials and civil society organizations, and improved support service for victims of crime, just to mention some measures. However, underreporting of hate crimes remains a serious problem. Officials need more knowledge and training on hate crimes in order to identify and address them properly. More effort should also be put in building trust between communities at risk of hate crimes and the public officials. Today's discussion shows us that work on hate crimes is carried out by several authorities as well as by civil society organizations. The role of civil society organizations is of utmost value in building bridges and raising awareness of the development needs in public policies and services. But as we could hear, we cannot put all the burden on NGOs and civil society. It was good to hear of concrete examples of work in different Nordic countries to combat hate crimes. These initiatives seek to address some of the very problems that were identified in the survey. As Minister Blomqvist noted at the beginning of this webinar, the Nordic cooperation offers a great platform for sharing information and for learning from each other's experience. There are many similarities in our societies, even though we are not identical. We also face similar challenges in the work for more equal societies. This webinar has offered us a great chance to exchange knowledge and views on how to address hate crime against LGBTI people. I hope that the examples and good practices we heard today have inspired you and that they can help to plan future work on this matter. We all want to see a society where the fundamental and human rights have become a lived reality for everyone. And I want to thank you all for participating in this event. Thank you to the Secretariat of the Nordic Council of Ministers and the NEKK for fruitful and good cooperation throughout the year. Thank you to our Nordic colleagues for your dedication and willingness to share and exchange views and knowledge. Tack till alla våra nordiska samarbetsländer. We look forward to the Norwegian presidency in 2022 and promise our support in the upcoming work for welfare of elderly LGBTI people. And finally, thank you to our colleagues at the Ministry for Social Affairs and Health for leading the presidency year with excellency. Let us continue the cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Corina, for these last words of the seminar. I have been listening to you happily and delighted. There are so many of us minority people who can get a better, safer life thanks to your work. I'm personally very grateful to every one of you. Thank you all the audience. Thank you also for the technical team. We will have a video of this whole seminar maybe after a couple of weeks, and you will then be informed on that too. Thank you so much. Have a safe trip back home.